And look at that, we're live.
Woo!
Sorry for the technical difficulties. If those of you been waiting, thanks for waiting patiently. I'm Kip Edwardson with Digital Summit, and thank you for joining us once again for another marketing spotlight. I have here with me today Christi Olson, who's a global SEM team lead at Microsoft.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. Let's do a quick intro. Chrissy's the head of evangelism for Bing at Microsoft, and is on the board of directors for the Search Engine Marketing Professional Organization. Those of you in the industry know that as SEMPO. And she's at the University of Idaho School of Business on the board there too. For over a decade, Christi has led in-house digital marketing teams at Microsoft, Expedia, Harry and David, and agency teams at Point Mark and Pointed. Harry David's about to get pretty busy. Valentine's Day.
Oh, yeah. Well, their busiest time was actually the last 2 months. So going into the Christmas holidays, one of their
Is
busiest
that right?
periods.
Yeah, I believe that. She's passionate about search marketing and has spent her career helping businesses solve their marketing challenges and goals by studying and analyzing data to develop actionable insights and strategies. And hey, who in digital marketing today is not dealing with some kind of data? Right, Christi?
Well, and I think it's been interesting as I've been looking the last 2 or 3 years about the core themes within digital marketing. Data and AI side by side are two of the biggest themes that we're hit with, because you need to have access to data to understand your customers, your consumers, how they engage with you, what they're doing. And then you also need the data as a marketer to understand how do you then remarket to them, and how do you use that data to help essentially take them through the flywheel and keep them engaged with you as a company.
Yeah, and I'm hearing, we had a great session at one of our summits. Somebody's coming in the background. We had a great session from one of our speakers who was talking about how keywords are really playing less of an importance, and it really is about understanding your consumer or your target audience and how that's become busier. You agree with that, or are you kind of like looking at the same things, customer
I'm
journeys, etc.?
I'm about halfway there, but not 100%. So keywords are still important because it gives us the
I
context
agree.
of what the person is looking for. So it gives you that intent signal of where they
Mhm.
might be at within their purchase journey. But the data side and audiences layered on top of the keywords is where you get the power and the amazingness that comes with the paid search as a marketing channel.
Yeah, is that your husband? I'm gonna wait for him.
Yeah, this is how you can tell it's COVID. We all work from home.
And it's also live. Yes, that's fantastic. Can you describe for us real quick your current role there at Microsoft?
Yeah, so I recently changed roles. I was the head of evangelism for search at Microsoft, being sort of the external outward face of search. So, doing a lot of the educational components and helping with a lot of creating the different materials and helping businesses really understand what is the value of search and what is the role of search in your overall marketing mix. I had the amazing opportunity to actually come in house and lead our paid search teams. And so, in October, I started a brand new role where any paid search globally run on behalf of Microsoft comes through me and my team. And we're leading what does the strategy look like? And now, how do we take a lot of the stuff I talked about in my previous role, actually put it into action in place on behalf of Microsoft as a company?
So one of the things you're probably seeing a lot of people search on is Xbox Series X.
Yes, and what's fun is I have a member of my team that is specific to Xbox, and I think the biggest challenge is we never seem to have enough consoles in stock. It sold out so quickly that I know my husband wanted one for Christmas, and I was not fast enough on the trigger to get him one.
Well, that's good news because I have a teenage son trying to get one, and if you can't get one in for your husband, that explains what's going on there.
You have to be on the site frequently to see when the inventory comes back in stock because they sell out so fast. But I hear it's a
Yeah,
great device.
yeah, we've burned some midnight oil trying to get a hold of one of those. So what's hot in SEM that we should know about? What's keeping you up at night, or what are you excited about coming into 2021, or both?
A little bit on the both sides. So I'd say the things that excite me are probably not the most exciting to everybody across the globe. So I am in love with understanding the data side of digital marketing. Where I am really pushing our teams is to really look at our audiences and how our audiences engage us across their decision journey. So a lot of people talk about a funnel. I've been going away from funnel and going toward a flywheel, because as you engage with a customer, you go from having a stranger to a to somebody who's aware of you, all the way down to getting them to engage and purchase in the acquisition side and then the retention side. So it's no longer just getting people in the top of a funnel and out the bottom to make that purchase, but using data to then loop them back in. So as they're searching for complementary products, complementary services, help and how-to and other materials, you are creating that holistic program to engage with them across the board. So for me, that's sort of where I am taking access to data and knowing what type of pathing do people go through as they're going through that journey. When they're investigating something really high up, like it might be, let's go back to Xbox. Somebody might search for best console. Well, we'd hope that they would choose the Xbox console, but they might also be looking at PlayStation and the Nintendo consoles because they came out with ones. So then understanding how do you take the search from best console and get it to the intent so you can get them into the Xbox ecosystem and get them engaging with all of our titles, all the games, as well as just the entire community that's built behind it and making that business case.
Yeah, and I've been around the block. I know some people who worked at Microsoft, and I've seen you guys speak at conferences and things. And I know you've got those personas and those segments broken down. Let's take Xbox. Like, you know who the hardcore gamers are, but also the ones that probably are a couple consoles behind. What is it, the 360, I believe, that haven't upgraded, right? And their searches and things probably look different.
Yeah. And so a lot of it is going back to understanding, like, what does that query pathing look like? How do you take information about the queries they're looking for and map that to intent, whether it's a purchase intent, it is the investigatory attempt of, like, we have the Xbox One S, I believe. It's the one I think came out 2 or 3 years ago, as well as the 360. And so, like, the query pathing, we're already embedded into that Xbox ecosystem. So we know the products and services, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't potentially also get maybe a PlayStation. So you have multiple different game systems. How do you then message to somebody who is aware of your ecosystem, doesn't quite understand the value of the 1X or of the newest version coming out there, so you can explain it in the world's shortest snippet that's about that big?
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any tools that you are investing in currently to help with that, to help with your efforts and with your team?
Yes. So on my team, we're using a whole bunch of different tools at this point in time. Excel is always the favorite across the board. And as much as individuals starting off in their career, when I tell them, get familiar with Excel because it's how you organize everything in paid search. The next step is you just can't escape it. So learn your functions, learn your formulas, learn how to create really in-depth spreadsheets to help you understand campaign structure, reporting, et cetera. But on top of that, we use a lot of bid optimization tools, and we've tested quite a few. Right now, we're using the Adobe. This goes back to I'm old, so I always want to call it Adobe Audience Manager, but I know they went from AMO to a new acronym.
No, they renamed everything.
So it's like we're using
again.
Yeah, we're using Adobe for understanding our audiences, as well as the campaign optimization and putting in those portfolios and rules for what we are targeting and how we target it. So there's just a ton of different platforms out there. I've used everything from Kinshu to Marin to Adobe to Acquisio from the optimization standpoint. But there's also tools out there that I think search marketers probably could spend a little bit more time digging into. And a lot of them do tend to have more of an SEO focus. So SEMrush, SEMrush, I can't remember. You can, depending what side of the pond you're on, depends on what you want to call it, like Spy4, where you can look at what is happening from who is bidding on what in your competitor set, who is engaged in that auction. So you can start to sort of understand, where do you fit into the competitive landscape? What are the other terms and phrases that maybe some of your competitors are going after that you aren't? So you can evaluate, is there more opportunity for you today?
And how are you guys preparing for a world coming up where we're seeing less emphasis talking about data, and we're going to have a lot of more data privacy, cookies, et cetera? How are you guys preparing for that and getting ready for that world?
That is a great question. And I actually released a paper that touched on it earlier this year. I'm trying to think what month. It must have been April of 2020. Released a paper on privacy and understanding the privacy landscape. How do the changes essentially in privacy then impact customer expectations and marketers' behaviors in terms of what we do? So as I think about the privacy landscape, one of the things I would say, for whether you're a search marketer or just a general marketer or digital marketer in general, it's worth keeping abreast of what are the shifts and changes that are happening, not just for GDPR, so the GDPR EMEA side, but also within the United States with the I think they also recently changed the acronym, and I just have it memorized as the California Consumer Protection Act, CCPA. but understanding how do those shift and changes that impact what you can collect, how do you use it, and the first, second, third party data sets. So it's going to be one where if you're a marketer, you don't have to have everything memorized, but just starting to go down that path of understanding what is required to hit the bare minimum, and then how do you take advantage of the data, your first party data that you have access to today, because we are moving a bit toward that cookieless world. And I think Apple finally went out with that first step with the latest operating system, where mobile app optimization based on the CCPA requirements is even more difficult from a tracking and tagging standpoint.
Yeah, and curious how in a firm like Microsoft, you guys spend a lot of money in advertising. I'm sure marketing attribution is a big part of that, tying it back to ROI. So what is the impact you're seeing from that side of it?
Well, it's meant we've had to really go back and look at what are we tagging, what are we tracking, and how are we doing it. And we actually are, because we're such a big company, we're very fortunate. We have individuals who that is their area of expertise. They're on top of all the shifts and changes happening and keeping me as a marketing manager informed of this is what's going to happen. Here's what we can do and what we can't do in terms of data. How do we respect people's privacy? I will say also Microsoft has been a leader in the privacy space, where as soon as we heard about GDPR, Microsoft started building out how do we make sure that we have privacy protection for not just individuals within Europe, but globally. How do we make sure that people have access to their data, they can control it, and they can choose what is shared or not shared? And then from the advertising standpoint, what it does mean is it just puts that much more of emphasis on your first party data, what data you collect and you own versus sharing or getting it from third party sites, so that you are taking advantage of your data sets and how you have them set up, whether it's display, social, or paid search, in order to reach the right audience and target that specific audience across different platforms.
And I'll bet you Microsoft has a team dedicated to GDPR as well.
So, I bet so.
Okay, so
we've got an entire privacy and security division.
Yeah, are they friends, enemies, or frenemies at this point?
I would say they're probably friends.
Yeah, I'll bet they keep you out of the hot water.
Well, and they keep me informed. So I think one of the bigger changes that happened was a little bit around tracking, and the fact that now individuals can communicate what portions of data do they want to have tracked or not tracked. And so where we see the implications on that, and it's not as big as I actually expect it to be, is that when we are doing advertising in certain markets, we actually don't get that first party data on the back end. So it restricts and limits what you can do from an audience targeting standpoint. So if you think of RLSA, remarketing lists for search ads, where you can do both positive and negative audiences, it sort of shifts and adjusts how you implement that, because individuals can opt out of essentially having their sites or having their browser cookied, so that you understand the actions they've taken on the site.
So I'm sure there's a product team that works on Bing. You're probably hand in hand with them. How's that interact when, in order to do your job? I mean, let's face it, you've got to be successful on the Google platform as well. So is it awkward? I'm just curious.
Well, no, it's not awkward at all. And I actually think in my previous role, being the search evangelist, I had to keep equally as up to date as what's happening on Google's platforms with organic and paid search. What are the difference and variances between Bing and Microsoft Ads and Google Search, Google Ads? So even now, a lot of what we're doing when I talk to our team is, hey, this is the shift and change happening on Google. Here's how that impacts our campaigns. Here's what's happening on Microsoft advertising and or Bing. How do we now adjust to make sure that what we're doing is holistic across both platforms, makes sense, and can be consistent?
Yeah. That's
so it's not awkward. It's actually a great conversation to have. And it's good for our engineering team to understand what are the shifts and changes happening, because it's important for them to make sure that we're looking at, are we at parity with features, yes or no? And not only are we at parity, but then where do we want to differentiate, and how do we differentiate in a way that will improve essentially our customer engagement with us?
I could pick your brain on that all day. I think that's got to be a fascinating part of the job.
Yep.
Hey, let's take a step back. You said you were previously in a role, and I think I had it in front of me, right? You were head of evangelism at Microsoft.
Yep.
So I guess first question is, how did you go from that role to the current role? And then talk about the scope of your previous role that you did there, because I know that was a big passion for you.
Yeah. So I have been, like you said, I've been managing paid search campaigns, paid and organic search campaigns since about 2005. So I'm old, I guess. My search baby is 16 years old. I've been practicing in this field, and I was at Microsoft actually running paid search on behalf of Microsoft before it sort of became the centralized team that's called Global Media that I'm a part of today. And when I left for startups and to get experience outside the Microsoft ecosystem of how are other types of businesses like an Expedia, Harry and David, how do they operate and how do they use both platforms? Um, when I came back into Microsoft, this really was my dream job of being the evangelist, of getting the chance to go out and sort of being that mouthpiece that can explain, here's search, here's how search impacts your business, here's the features and functionalities that you may know about, but you also may not. And so it was a really amazing job, and I absolutely loved it. I now have 2 children under the age of 4, and I had a lot of conversations with my manager around what does that look like over time due to travel? Because I don't know if I call it my worst or best year. I hit 80 in person of speaking engagements in a calendar year.
Oh my
And
goodness.
if you think about how our calendar or how the conference season works, it pretty much, you have a couple in February, but it's February through May, and sometimes a couple in June, and then you have October, November. So there's multiple months where you have no events. So if you're hitting
Right.
80 events in a 5-month window, I didn't get to see my kids as often as I wanted to.
Mm.
It still is one of my dream jobs, and I absolutely love it. But I decided I'm at the phase of life right now where I'd like to be home a little bit more and spend more time with my family instead of being on the road. Granted, COVID did happen, so that sort of made an adjustment there. And there was an opening essentially to lead our search efforts. They were looking for someone who understands both organic and paid search forward and backwards, who's run it both in-house, agency side, to help lead that team and really think about what does our strategy look like for how we do search, how do we put together the framework of how we operate search across Microsoft, and then how do we put together the measurement framework and driving growth across lines of business, including some very well-established businesses.
Yeah, and question for you on that role, the evangelism role. Words aren't coming well to me today. What advice would you have for somebody who would want to follow that career path? And what about that role do you think made you a better leader?
Yes. So I am actually really happy that one of my colleagues, John Lee, who originally was at Clicks Marketing, he came over to Microsoft, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, and was on our training team. He's actually taken over as my previous evangelist role, where I think if somebody is wanting to go down that path, what you really need to start working on is, number one, your presence. So a lot of
Mhm.
it does go back to personal branding, of understanding what you are doing in the space. So writing, sharing your knowledge, your information across the different industry outlets, whether it means like Search Engine Land, Search Engine Journal, some of the search publications, as well as some other types of publications, to show that you can clearly articulate the value and what is happening within search and how other individuals can understand how it fits into the overall marketing mix. That is a big area for evangelism. So being able to do it in written format, but then also going out and speaking at conferences and events. I know I've spoken with you guys at several of the digital summits. I absolutely love the speaking side, but understanding what is the message you're trying to get across. How do
Mhm.
you tell it in a story format that's both educational and entertaining? So edutational, edutaining. Is really helpful. And you have to start to establish yourself. Predominantly, it starts with writing and then going out and earning some of the speaking positions and getting out there so that you can represent a brand, represent a product or a service in a way that aligns to their strategy, but that you are really just helping drive that forward from that point of view.
And do you see yourself more on the marketing side, or because of what you do as SEM digital marketer, do you find yourself maybe a little more toward? Does it feel more STEM? And given that, what advice would you have for young professional women looking to perhaps follow in your footsteps?
Yes. It's a great question whether it's more STEM or it's more marketing. I'm one of the few people I think that I know of that got into digital marketing with a marketing background. When I talk to a lot of my colleagues and coworkers, we have teachers, we have anthropologists, we have English majors, a lot of different majors across the board. I actually did study marketing, information systems, and oddly enough, German through college, and have degrees in that area. And where I would say that it's helpful on the science and the STEM side is understanding and having that mindset to understand the technology and how the
Mhm.
technology pulls together and works. Like 3 years ago, we noticed that there was a huge shift in the marketplace of understanding artificial intelligence, and how does artificial intelligence play into your digital marketing? How does it play into search marketing? How has it evolved what we do and how we do it? I am definitely not an AI expert. I will not profess to be able to create the algorithms, understands all the systems on the back end, but you have to have that growth mindset to be able to understand what you know and continue learning, so that even if you aren't the mile deep expert in that topic, you can understand how does that fit into what's the core story that's happening, what are the features and tools that are useful to individuals, and really start to play with it. So understanding, for me, I dug in on the voice assistant side and started playing quite a bit of understanding, like how are people using it, what do they use it for, when does it work, when does it fail. And then for me, the marketer in me loved doing now if we think about as a voice first world without a screen versus a screened world, what are the changes and shifts we would have to take as marketers and brands to make sure that our products, services work on that voice interface versus a screen-based interface. And so if you're just getting started, growth mindset, willingness to learn, and just the love for education and continuing to further your own educational path is really important.
I love it. It's similar advice that I've given too, is to always be curious. And if you're always willing to learn and don't think you have everything figured out. And I think the older you get, the more you appreciate that. It's hard to understand when you're younger, because you want to prove to everybody that, no, I can do this, I know everything. But when you're older, you're like, no, I know you don't know everything.
It's like having kids. I've learned so much and now I really know nothing.
So true. So true. Yes, I've got 3 in my eye, so I know what that's like. Including one who really wants an Xbox X, if I haven't made that point.
Well, if you go to the Xbox site, we do have some of our partner referrals that'll tell you when they show up and you have the link you can click on, it means they should have the inventory in stock. You just have to look at it almost every day.
Oh, good tip. Everybody tuning in, you heard that one. So let's talk about web accessibility a little bit more. How do you feel like, if at all, it has 2020 and 2021, with so many people working remotely, has that really had an impact or made people probably more aware of it?
I think it's dependent on the lines of business. So 2020, and I'm trying to remember who I heard the quote from, but essentially I've heard that in 2020, you had a decade worth of digital transformation happen in like a 6-month window. So where we were at from a technology standpoint with most businesses and brands, they had to evolve so quickly to allow everything to be remote work, to allow the infrastructure and the tools and technology so that people could collaborate while working remotely. So I think from where we're at is that we've leaped forward about a decade in terms of the technology on the back end. And we are going to the area of, in 2021, a little bit less on the accessibility side, that people now are understanding the basics of how do you make things more accessible. But now it's just a matter of going in and actually doing it across the site, making sure that if you, and I'm going to state this, and I know this is a controversy because some people agree with me and some people don't. We actually had a really great debate at the last digital summit in Raleigh when I spoke about accessibility, where I believe that the accessibility does lie in part with your search team, your organic team, because they need to understand the content on page. How do you create the content? How do you optimize the content on page in order to have it discoverable by the search engines? If you think about it, a search engine is an awful lot like an individual that might have visual impairments or audio impairments, because you can't always see all of the content. So you look at the clues on the page to understand the intent, understand what it is about it. And because of that, while I understand the UX side does not sit on the SEO teams or the search teams, the implementation and making sure that it's done in a way that's helpful to a bot that does not necessarily have eyes is similar to how you would do it for making sites accessible.
So let's build on that. What advice would you have for a company going in 2021 that should be thinking about accessibility and being a leader in accessibility or improving in that area?
I think the areas, if you're looking at getting started, is going in and understanding how is your site set up and structured today, and where are the opportunities to improve some of the little things. There's a lot of little tiny components and elements, such as how your tabbed navigation structure works, so that individuals who are on a screen reader or other device can easily move from section of page to section of page. The low-hanging fruits across the board a lot of times do end up being how the page structure is set up, but also then making sure you have the right alt text, so that if somebody is visually impaired and you have the screen reader reading out loud what the image is, like for us right now, it'd be like you have two people sitting having a conversation versus image 1234 JPF qx.jpg, where if you have the description, you have the titles, and you have the alt text that helps someone understand what is that image on the page that they aren't able to see. So it's breaking it down into what are the smaller bite-sized pieces that you can tackle a little bit more quickly and more agile, and then using some of the different free tools and software out there that allow you to look at your page and understand where do you have opportunity to improve to make it so it is more accessible and better with accessibility.
Wow, nailed it. That's some really good advice. So we're going to pivot real quick, and then we'll close out with this one. So I noticed in your bio that you said you're constantly chasing the perfect craft beer.
Yes.
Have you found it? Or is this a proverbial chase? Like
It's going to be proverbial
trail,
chase. There's no end to it because there's always so many great breweries out there.
right?
My husband and I are members of WABL, the Washington Beer Lovers Association.
Ooh.
Pre-COVID, they would host like once every month, they would have some sort of beer festival, and you'd have up to about 200 different breweries come and bring in some of their best-in-class beers. I would say some of them are amazing. Some of them are definitely not my personal taste. While I might be in Seattle, I'm not a hophead. My husband is the hophead. I tend to love a little bit more of the Weissens. So I am always on the lookout for either a good chocolatey stout or a porter that has nice coffee flavor, all the way to the banana clovey white beers from Europe. And so I'm always trying new ones and trying to see what I can add to the collection of things that I always want to purchase when I find them.
So because you're out there in Washington, is he like lean toward the West Coast IPAs?
My husband? Oh yeah.
Yeah. And you're the more Belgian style.
I'm more Belgian. Like my husband's, I think, actually, I haven't asked him if it's changed. His all-time favorite was Ninkasi's, now I'm going to forget I remember what the logo looks like, Tricera hops, which is a triple dry hopped beer. It's great. On the IBU scale, you can't even taste how much bitters are in it. And that is definitely not my favorite. I can have a little bit of it, but I prefer to drink my beer and not feel like I'm chewing on the hops themselves.
Yeah, some of them are a bit on the palate fatigue. I find if you're a Belgian, you lean toward the Belgians, and he's an IPA drinker. I find the one where you can meet in the middle are the saisons. If you have the farmhouse style, that I love those. Those are always really good.
Oh yeah, nope. We definitely have gone through our share of breweries in the Pacific Northwest, and when we travel, we've tried to hit up as many of the different breweries and region that we can go to. I think still one of my all-time favorites, and I'm sorry to Washington State, but I think Bend, Oregon. If you are a beer lover and you love beer, go to Bend. They have, I want to say it's 18 breweries. It's either 17 or 18 right there in the Bend, like I was gonna say, metropolitan area. I don't know if it's big enough to be considered metropolitan, but the beer trail and ale trail has awesome beers on it. And I'd say I don't think there's a single company in Bend that I do not appreciate and like the beers of.
I've heard about that, and I have a good friend in Portland who I got to go out there and visit because they've got amazing craft breweries there too. But you can't have too many craft breweries if you're also into ultra marathon running.
Well, I had to take a break. With when I had kids on the ultra side. I'm hopefully getting back into it. I think I'm 8 weeks out. I just actually had surgery yesterday to repair a hernia. So I get to take a break, like an 8-week break from running and working out. And then I will get back into it. My goal is at some point I do want to try to run 100 unsupported.
So I got to meet a guest speaker years ago, and I wrote his name down. I don't know if you know him, Dean Carneses.
I don't.
All right, so he wrote this book, and he wanted to run entirely through Greece and go, meet his family history and all this stuff. It's pretty fascinating. So this ultra marathon runner, I'm like, I got to hear how this guy trains for this stuff. You know, blah, blah, blah. And he shows this video of him on Discovery Channel running on this treadmill. And they come to find out he's just like almost like an Avenger. Like he's got this weird DNA that just, he doesn't get tired. And I was so disappointed because I thought I'm going to learn about this amazing like training regimen. And I was like, no, he's just a freak.
Oh, because I've done a bunch of 50s, and I would say the training going into it was very important. And a lot of times the training, right now I'm sitting, but when I am prepping for a marathon, I stand all day because the more time on your feet prepares you for when you're running. And then you also just have to be very consistent with your running plans. I've done everything from following the marathon training where it has you increase your distances up until like if you're doing marathons 26 miles, where you do like the 2 weeks before you hit 22 miles. I find that just running consistently, in addition to getting a couple of those long runs in, is helpful. But just the consistency of a little bit every day. And the last 2 years, my daughter will be 2 pretty soon. I haven't been able to run as much because I knew I had some damage that happened during birth. When I'm getting back into it, it's going to be really just you don't have to be perfect. And it's not about going out there and doing the best you can every day in the furthest distance you can, but consistency of, if you can't run, walk 2 miles. If you can't, jog for a little bit. And even now, knowing that I was going to be having the surgery this month, I started going back to lifting and really getting my core strong, knowing that will help me on the recovery side and will help me get back up to running, hopefully the longer distances sometime in the next few months.
Well, I subscribe to the theory that the more I work out, the more craft beer I can drink. So, there's that too.
Right? And the better food you can eat.
Right. And chasing a 2-year-old, that's going to feel like an ultra marathon. I got it. So bless you. Sounds like you've got the work-life balance down. I'm sure you're put as much into being a mother as you do your career. And I appreciate you sharing with us your career advice and your role. Christi Olson, everybody from Microsoft, thank you for joining us. And we're going to go ahead and close this out.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Christi.